Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and we are here. We're in Nipton actually, so left off just after recording Tuesday's video because the first plant that we're talking about is right here. So we are going to be talking about the vegetables, which are an important part of any diet, and there's quite a few to talk about, but most of them are actually in both games with the exception of a couple that we'll talk about as we get to them. So the one that's in Fallout New Vegas that isn't in Fallout 4 is the jalapeno pepper. So there is a plant, so we're just kind of to the west of Nipton Town Hall next to the big trailer and the overturned trailers, and behind this rock we have a jalapeno. So the scientific name is Capsicum annuum. So let's start with a little bit of spice. So jalapeno peppers originally came from Mexico and were cultivated by the Aztecs before the Spanish conquest. So the Aztecs were even selling chipotles, which is smoked jalapenos, at markets, and the plant is now produced in China, Peru, Spain and India, as well as Mexico. They're commonly pickled as well as being used fresh, sometimes dried as well. So in terms of the Scoville scale, which if you don't know, the Scoville scale rates the spiciness of chilies. So jalapenos fall between 4,000 and 8,500 units on the Scoville scale, which places them at the mild end of the spectrum compared to, say, the ghost pepper or the Carolina Reaper. But they do add a bit of something to cooking. And the substance that is responsible for the heat of peppers is capsaicin. So this substance is an irritant to tissue, which is what causes the spicy sensation when eaten. It is actually burning you when you eat it, which is why it is essential to avoid touching your face, especially your eyes or any other sensitive body parts after handling chili peppers. That said, as well as the culinary purpose, capsaicin is used for topical pain relief because it causes endorphin release. Endorphins are the kind of happy chemicals that make you feel good but also act as painkillers by binding to opioid receptors similar to your opiate painkillers. That's also a reason that some people do really enjoy eating spicy food, because the spice does release these endorphins, the happy chemicals that make them feel good, so they enjoy it. Not everybody. I am definitely a mild to moderate spice kind of person. But I know people that can tolerate much higher amounts of spice. Oh, I forgot I'm wearing a fancy hat in this. It is also used for defence of the plant and used for defence of people. So it's an ingredient, capsaicin's an ingredient in pepper spray, which is your, defensive spray that you can carry in certain parts of the world. It's actually illegal in the UK. But I know, and the States in some places you're allowed to carry it for self-defence, but also can be used as a deterrent for mammals. And interestingly, the capsaicin or peppers are often added to birdseed to deter rodents like your squirrels and your rats and mice from stealing them, because the rodents don't like the spice. But birds are different. They have different kinds of pain receptors than mammals. So they're insensitive to capsaicin, which means they're not affected by the spiciness. So that gives a symbiosis to the plants, because the bird will eat the fruit of the tree, of the plants, and then disperse the seeds as they defecate when they're travelling. So it's a way for the seeds to get spread, so that the plant, obviously its offspring, can continue to grow. If you have something contaminated with capsaicin, such as a knife or your hands, water usually isn't enough to clean it up and to reduce the level there, but alcohol dissolves it. So, if you've got rubbing alcohol, something like that, actually would be quite effective. If it is too hot for you when you eat something spicy, then milk does help because it emulsifies the capsaicin and keeps it away from the tissue of your gut. So that's why people, if they do eat something that is too spicy for them, milk is generally the go-to for relieving that discomfort. So they are found across the desert, wild growing here, so you'll find them in various places, but just conveniently there happens to be one right here, where I left off with the other video in Nipton. So you can see the plants with these kind of big flat leaves, And the fruits, they are technically berries, I believe, if you want to get really technical about it. They do count as food in terms of your hardcore mode. So if you're hungry and you find them, then they are available. And you get +1 hit points for 5 seconds. There's no rads with these, which is nice. But in hardcore mode, you get -10 starvation, but you do get +5 dehydration. So they do make you a little bit dehydrated as well. And we did talk about one of the recipes, that is the gecko kebab. So when we talked about the banana yucca, which was the Fruit of New Vegas video, that required gecko meat, the banana yucca and a jalapeno to make the gecko kebab. The other one, I don't know if I have. Here we go. So I've just found my way. So this is Cook's camp. There's the man over there. You can tell by his flamethrower and his fiend buddies. So in his little camp, once you kill them all, I say I've got combat turned off, but you know, you need to kill all these guys normally, then you can pick up this recipe here, which is Cook's Fiend Stew. You can also actually find the ingredients other than the beer to make it. It won't let me use this campfire though because I'm technically in combat, so I'm missing the beer. Yeah, so the only ingredient you can't find here is the beer. You do need 2 of them, Brahmin meat, a fresh potato and a jalapeno, and that makes you Cook's Fiend Stew. So it's quite a good one. You do need survival skill of 75 to make this. And while Cook is a vile, horrible person, he does seem to be a good chef, because this gives you hit points +6 per second for 1 minute and strength +3, which is pretty impressive. So if you're doing 3-card bounty, then you can pick this recipe up as you... I don't even know whose bits are whose here. So yeah, probably not going to be able to get his head, never mind, oh well. But yeah, so that's one interesting recipe that you can find here. And the final recipe that I'm in combat from now. So the final recipe, which I don't have all the ingredients for, which we talked about with the white horse nettle plant, which was the first video of this series. And that's your kind of, it cures poison and reduces your rads and does cost a wee bit in endurance, but with a jalapeno, a vodka and a white horse nettle, you get this kind of antidote that you can make as well. So yeah, very, very interesting. So that's the only one that's pretty much unique to Fallout New Vegas. Obviously, you know, the kind of climate and things in this part of the world is very different to what it is in the East Coast. So, you know, that obviously makes a difference. We're in a desert, so you're going to have different plants that thrive here. Some plants will thrive in both environments, but some won't. But that's, yeah, very interesting. So now we are going to make our way over to the Commonwealth. Alright, welcome back to the Commonwealth. I'm here at the slog because that's where I left off, and it already has quite a lot of the crops we're going to talk about. So the first one to talk about is this one, which is razor grain. So there's not a confirmed real world analogue for this crop in Fallout 4, but it does appear to be one that you use in place of wheat. Per the Pridwin's Botany terminal, wheat doesn't grow in the Wasteland, so it's not available anymore. Why is there a dead body over there? So when I just spotted that, I got a bit distracted. Like, who died? Oh, I have no idea because you're missing your head. Deirdre. Oh, I like Deirdre. She was nice. Anyway, unfortunate, but that's the reality of the Wasteland. So razor grain, you have this stuff instead, which does also grow wild. You can plant it as a crop, but it does also grow wild in some places across the Commonwealth. So it can obviously be the grain from it can be ground into flour, or it can be eaten as is. It gives you 0.5 food for your settlements. So eating that as is does give you 10 hit points and 2 rads, but it's not considered food as far as survival mode is concerned. It is used in a number of recipes for food though, so let's take a look at them. So we will start with the roast, which, where's the first one? So Mirelurk cakes, which I can make here. So you need a Mirelurk egg, Mirelurk meat, an oil, and a razor grain. And this food is very interesting. So it's basically like crab cakes and very similar to the recipe that you can find in the Anchorage War Memorial in Fallout 3. So Mirelurk cakes are really, really good. They give you 140 hit points, as you can see, and also the ability to breathe underwater for 30 minutes. So that's quite handy if you never took Aqua Boy or Aqua Girl, but you need to go diving for treasure or something, then making some Mirelurk cakes can be very, very helpful. The next one, which I should have. Right, we're off on a little adventure here to find the recipe. I thought I'd picked it up on this save file, but obviously I did not. So we're at the Slocum's Joe corporate headquarters, which is here in the kind of Malden area. So, you know, near Vault 75. Malden Centre. Vault 75 is the one that's inside the school. Medtech Research. All these places, and we've got the donut place. So there is a advanced locked safe in the offices, boarded up windows. Who are you guys? Raiders. That was extremely rude, setting me on fire, sir. I do not appreciate that, but also you're not getting into that safe, but I'm getting into that safe. There we go. Perfect, so there's 100 pre-war money, and Slocum's Buzz Bites recipe. So that is good. That's what we're looking for. I can't believe I never did that. Anyway, I'll head back out here. Alright, back outside. Conveniently, cooking station right here. Now that we have the recipe, we should have Slocum's Buzz Bites. So these are kind of interesting. These were a kind of invention that did not get released to the public because of the harm that was caused, but the recipe is still locked away in the corporate headquarters. So essentially these were donut holes that were filled with hot coffee, hence the buzz, but they caused third degree burns, so not really suitable for sale, so they never actually made it onto the shelves. But if you want to make them, you need a coffee tin, dirty water, a Mirelurk egg, oil, and 3 razor grain. And when you make them, you get +1 perception, you get +25 maximum AP for 1 hour, and also you get burned. It says you burns your mouth when eating, so you lose 10 hit points from eating these. So, you know, use with caution. But interestingly, because the coffee is there, you would think that if you were playing survival mode, that donut holes would equal food and coffee would equal caffeine, but for some reason they do not. It's probably an oversight in the game, that, you know, when survival mode was added, because these did exist in the release of the game when it first came out, but when they added survival mode later, these might have got missed in that, or something just didn't get added to the code. But basically they don't count as food or as caffeine for the purpose of survival mode, so bear that in mind. They were also supposed to have an addiction mechanic, but that was cut from the game in the end. And then the next recipe is a nice simple one, which is your noodle cup, which I'm guessing that comes under soup. Yeah. So you just need a razor grain and a dirty water. Super easy to make, really convenient, and you get yourself a cup of ramen, you get some noodles. So you get 40 hit points from these, and in survival mode you get water as well as food. So, you know, they're really, really simple, really easy to make, and pretty effective for your food and water needs in survival mode and for some healing as well. And then the final one, which I don't have on this save file, I don't think, If you did get the Creation Club pack with the coffee and donuts, which allows you to build your own Slocum's Joe franchise, franchises basically, then you get a recipe to make the donuts, which needs 2 razor grains and sugar bombs as well. And finally, if you have the contraptions workshop and you build the food processor, you do need razor grain to make the Blamco mac and cheese, the Fancy Lad snack cakes, and sugar bombs as well. So, you know, they basically replace wheat and replace flour. I don't know whether they're gluten free or not, but yeah. So that's razor grain for you. So we'll head back to Sanctuary, I think, for the next step. Seems the Brahmin are having quite the discussion at the moment. Here we go, carrots, the humble carrot. So, a root vegetable that's usually orange in colour but does come in other shades including purple, red and white. It's native to Europe and southwestern Asia, most likely originating from Iran, probably at the time where it was still called Persia. So the orange colour that's in carrots, it comes from beta-carotene, which it makes them a rich source of vitamin A, retinol, essentially vitamin A. And because of this, there is a myth that they help you see in the dark, because one of the symptoms of vitamin A deficiency is vision problems, but the myth that carrots help you see in the dark is actually propaganda in the UK that was put out during World War II, and it was to account for how the British pilots could fly and fight in the dark. So the intention was to mask the fact that they had introduced radar, which obviously allows them to see in the dark, essentially. So that was basically so that the public didn't know and it didn't get out to the enemies that the British, the RAF had access to radar now, and that's how they were able to see the enemy planes in the dark, which is an interesting one. Carrots do take 2 years to reach maturity, so they store energy in 1 year, in the first year, in order to flower, and when they get to the second year. So they are related to a lot of herbs like parsley, coriander, which for my US friends is cilantro. We call it coriander. Fennel, anise, dill and cumin. They're also closely related to parsnips, and at one point the carrots were actually grown more for their leaves and flowers than they were for the roots that we now know. So nutritionally, carrots are pretty good for you. Oh, there's a radiation storm coming in. They are pretty good for you. They do have some sugar and fibre, but they also provide a lot of vitamin A, some vitamin K and potassium. They don't give you night vision, sadly, but during World War II, people were encouraged to eat them, and also that was partly why they put out that story about the carrots giving you good night vision for the pilots, because food supplies were limited. A lot of stuff that would normally be imported wasn't available and food was rationed. So carrots grew well in the UK and our kind of soil and the climate that we have here. So people were encouraged to grow carrots and eat them and use them for basically everything. So they do show up in all the games. So you do find them in Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 3. Not really growing, but they're found in people's inventories by traders, or in Rivet City there's the table that's got a few different kind of fruit and vegetables on it that they've grown when they're doing their hydroponics in Rivet City. But in Fallout New Vegas, carrots are actually not included in any recipes, but they do count as food, so you know there's that. In Fallout 4, they are a plantable crop, and they provide 0.5 food for settlers. They give you 10 hit points and 3 rads when eaten raw, but they are involved in a huge list of recipes. We already talked about the tasty Deathclaw omelette last week, but there are a few others, so let's have a look. So we'll start with the soup. So you've got iguana soup, which needs a carrot, a dirty water and 3 iguana bits. And that gives you 95 hit points, so nice and simple. Nothing too complicated there, but a decent healing item. Then you've got your squirrel stew, And you need a carrot, a potato, dirty water, a blood leaf and squirrel bits. So you get 105 hit points and you get plus 2% XP gain for 2 hours, which is fairly nice. And then your vegetable soup, unsurprisingly, carrots and potatoes, dirty water, and that gives you 55 hit points and 25 rad resistance for an hour. So, you know, that's kind of a nice one as well. And then we'll go back to the roast category. So you've got your Yao Guai roast, which will be down at the bottom. So Yao Guai roast, carrot, potato and Yao Guai meat, unsurprisingly, 210 hit points, which is really nice, and plus 10 melee damage for 1 hour. So handy healing item for melee characters that gives you a wee bit of a damage boost as well, which is pretty nice. And if you make the ribs instead, then you get damage resistance instead of that. But the Yao Guai roast is definitely a good one for melee characters. Finally, chicken noodle soup, which I missed in the soup section. Never mind, chicken noodle soup. So this one was added by Far Harbour, and it calls for a black blood leaf, a carrot, a chicken thigh and dirty water, and you get 60 hit points and you get 55 rad resistance for 30 minutes with that. So that one is also pretty nice. Getting the chicken thighs can be the challenging part because the chickens are small, fast and not easy to catch sometimes, but you know, that's quite a nice little item if you can get your hands on some. And carrots are also part of the recipe for the Blamco mac and cheese in the food processor from the Contraptions Workshop. And then on the chem side of things, we'll just head over to my chemistry station, which is just over there. So chemistry, we are looking at the orange mentats. So you need a dose of mentats, you need 3 carrots, and you need an asbestos, which is maybe not the healthiest thing, but here we are. And you put that together and you get your orange mentats. So these give you plus 5 perception and plus 10% VATS accuracy for 8 minutes. And this does carry a 10% chance of addiction. Potentially could come in handy. Yeah, so that's the other thing there. And then the final one is the drinks, which I don't have the recipes for, but if you go to Far Harbour and you go to the roof of the Vim Pop factory, there's a research terminal there where you can get a bunch of recipes for different Vim drinks, and you need a carrot to make the Vim Quartz, which was one that was a subject of a whole thing because Nuka-Cola came out with Nuka-Cola Quartz and that caused some issues between the two companies. But you can get the recipe for that, and you need a bottle of Vim, a carrot and a bubble gum. And Vim Quartz gives you plus 75 hit points, plus 25 action points and plus 15 carry weight for 5 minutes, which is pretty nice. So that's good. So next we need to talk about is corn. I know I have some here. I think I've got all the crops planted at this place. One of these days I'll come in and actually do some proper building and redecoration of my settlements, but there we go. So yep, we've got corn, which is called maize in Fallout New Vegas. It's the same plant, just different names for it. So the scientific name is Zea mays, and corn is a very common crop in the US, as I say a lot of people that live there will know. So they grow these tall stalks and then ears of corn, which are a kind of grain, so it's classed as a cereal grain. And corn is used for a multitude of things. It was domesticated in southern Mexico about 9,000 years ago. It does rely on humans for propagation, and it is a staple food in many parts of the world. It's also a very important crop for animal feed, both the grain and the actual plant itself, the stalks and things, which can be baled up like hay or could be made into silage. If you don't know, silage is kind of sort of fermented grass, so instead of drying it to make hay, it's kind of sealed up to ferment a little bit, and then that's used as a feedstuff, particularly for dairy cows, but for a lot of kind of livestock as well. So corn stalks, the plants can actually be used for that. We can't eat the plants, we can only eat the grain, but you know, cows are built different. So as well as food, as is, so you know, people will eat corn on the cob, add it to different things. It can be used to make cornmeal, which is then used for things like tortillas, corn starch, corn syrup, corn oil, and even alcohol like bourbon whiskey, and even biofuels. So it's an incredibly useful plant. It's a good source of your B vitamins and some essential amino acids, and it can even be used to make plastics, fabrics, and adhesives. So, you know, quite impressive range of uses for this one plant. So in Fallout New Vegas, maize is grown wild, and it's also grown in many settlements, including Good Springs and the NCR Sharecropper Farms. It heals 1 hit point per second, and for 9 seconds, and in hardcore mode it counts as a pretty good food source actually. So you get -40 starvation, and you get -10 dehydration as well. I don't actually happen to have any on me, but never mind. But in terms of cooking, it is part of the mole rat stew recipe. So we should have that somewhere. There we go. So mole rat stew, so you need a beer, a maize, mole rat meat, and a pinto bean pod, and for that you get hit points +6 per second for 30 seconds, and you get strength +3. So that one it's obviously affected by your survival skill, which must be minimum of 65 to make this recipe. It is also part of the recipe for Cass's moonshine, which I don't have the recipe for. You need to have her as a follower and stuff to get that recipe. But if you want something extra spicy, I think that needs to be at the workbench. So let me just fast travel up to Good Springs just quickly. There it is. So yep, flamer fuel. So you can make homemade flamer fuel, which needs 2 maize, 1 sugar bombs, and a box of detergent, and a science skill of 50. That gets you 20 units of homemade flamer fuel. It's just as effective as your standard flamer fuel, but it is 3 times more damaging to your weapon condition, so something to bear in mind. But in a pinch, if you use your flamer, then that's an option there. So, you know, a couple of interesting little recipes for maize, which is also corn, and I'm pretty sure, just to see what the plant looks like. So yeah, they do grow it here in Good Springs. They have quite a range. It does count as stealing if you take it, so just bear that in mind. This man won't be happy if you go stealing his crops, but you can pick it there. So it does look a wee bit different. This one looks fairly similar to the kind of standard one that you see in real life, but you know, the grain normally it's obviously that bright yellow colour, but you do sometimes see it in different colours as well. So yeah, so we'll head back over to the Commonwealth because there's quite a few recipes that we need corn for, and there's still a few other things to talk about, so I'll see you there in just a second. Okay, so I managed to find, for some reason all my crops at Sanctuary have disappeared when I reloaded the save. I don't know what happened there, but we're at this little house that you can go into just at the edge of Concord, so it's kind of the first house that you see as you come down the road to find some gourds. So this is the next vegetable. So these are members of the cucurbitaceae species. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but never mind. So they're part of the same family as pumpkins, squash, cucumbers, and melons, among many others. And they grow low to the ground on these kind of vines with these large leaves, and they kind of grow sort of along the ground rather than growing up the way. So they're crops that have been used by humans for thousands of years, and possibly one of the first domesticated plant species, if not the first domesticated plant species in the history of human agriculture. So they do provide food, and they also, dried out, can be used for all kinds of crafts, musical instruments, all sorts of things, and people will use them for. Not all of the plants in the family are edible, but many of them are, and they also do play a role in some creation myths in certain cultures. In Fallout 4, they count as 0.5 food for your settlers, and you do find one growing behind the yellow house in Sanctuary alongside the melon cousins, so they count as food with 10 hit points and 3 rads. I'll actually just grab a couple so you can find some behind this first house in Concord, and there's wild mute fruit there as well if you are interested in that. And we'll head back up to Red Rocket just now to take a look at the recipes. I don't think we need to put boy light on because it's broad daylight. So there's only a couple of recipes that you need the gourds for in cooking. This is the doggo settlement, by the way. There's nobody here but dogs. Just because. So cooking station. So there it is, radstag stew. So that calls for a gourd, radstag meat, a silk bean and vodka, and for that you get 150 hit points and +3 energy resistance for an hour. So you know, it's not a bad item. I think probably more people would be interested in just roasting the radstag meat because you get the carry weight bonus, which probably more people would find useful. But you know, this one's quite a nice healing item, and if you are going up against all the synths or something, then energy resistance could be beneficial for you in that situation. And then there is another Vim recipe which you need a gourd for. So that is Vim Refresh, which is the apple flavoured one. So you need a Vim, you need a package of Dandy Boy apples, and you need a gourd in order to make Vim Refresh. So the recipe can be acquired from the factory. On the top there's a research terminal on the roof of the Vim Pop factory in Far Harbour, so you can acquire the recipe from there. And Vim Refresh gives you 50 hit points, +35 action points, and increased action point recovery rate by 10 action points per second for 60 seconds, which is pretty nice as well, especially if you are a VATS user and you are using your AP quite a lot. That's quite a handy one. There we go. So we're here at Abernathy Farm to talk about potatoes and tatoes. So I've lumped these two together and there's good reason for that. So your scientific names, Solanum tuberosum is your potatoes, and Solanum lycopersicum is your tomatoes, or tomatoes if you're American, but we call them tomatoes here. So it's an interesting one. In Fallen New Vegas you can find the fresh potatoes. They're only found like in inventories or for sale. And potatoes are a tuber vegetable, so the edible part that we like is grown from the root of the plant. Potatoes are very starchy and they are considered a staple food in many parts of the world. Potatoes were originally introduced to Europe by the Spanish, who brought them from the Americas. And potatoes are a member of the nightshade family, so parts of the plant are actually toxic, mainly the leaves and stems, which contain solanine. So potato skins can become toxic if they're exposed to too much light and they turn green. They start producing the toxin, so something to bear in mind. Make sure you store potatoes in a cool, dark place. And solanine it can be pretty nasty actually. It acts on the guts and your nervous system, so it can cause all sorts of symptoms: vomiting, diarrhea, heart arrhythmias, headaches, skin problems, joint inflammation, thyroid issues. Can progress to hallucinations, paralysis, fever, jaundice, hypothermia and death. So, you know, not great for you really. You know, pretty nasty. And I say you'll notice that the two scientific names I gave you are, the genus is the same, Solanum, and that is because potatoes and tomatoes are part of the same genus. They are part of the same family as belladonna, deadly nightshade. Yeah, so they're part of the same family as the deadly nightshade, and that also includes your tomatoes, as I said, and even your tobacco plants. So bear in mind this is for educational purposes only. Do not use this information for anything else. Potatoes do have a little bit of protein in them, but they're a decent source of vitamin C, your B vitamins and potassium. They're not easy for us to digest when eaten raw, so generally for humans we'll cook them, but they do make decent food for livestock, like, what's her name, Clarabelle, I think, the Brahmin over here. So you can feed them to the potatoes to livestock. They can also be used to brew alcohol, particularly like vodka, and the starch is used for textiles and for paper production as well. So let's talk about tomatoes. So the reason for that is that tatoes in Fallout 4 are a hybrid between potatoes and tomatoes. seemingly inheriting the less palatable properties of each of them. It's not too wild given that the plants are related, they're in the same genus. Like most true hybrids, the species do need to be kind of fairly closely related in order to create these hybrids, so kind of makes sense that that would happen here. So tomatoes are the fruit of the Solanum lycopersicum, which originates from South America and was domesticated in South America or Mexico. So they grow on these kind of tall vines normally. Some of them do need a wee bit of support while growing. But they are vulnerable to frost, so in temperate climates like the UK, they can be grown in the summer inside like a greenhouse, but they would only really do well outside in kind of warmer climates. But there are a huge number of varieties spread for different kinds, and tomatoes are used very widely across the world in sauces, soups, food. The Italians particularly like their tomatoes and incorporate them into their cuisine, but so does a lot of the world. They're eaten raw, they're eaten juiced, they can be cooked. They're low in calorie and they do have a moderate supply of vitamin C, but otherwise they're actually quite low in micronutrients. And like their potato cousins, the leaves, the stems and unripe green fruit do contain solanine, and they also contain tomatine, which is another toxic alkaloid produced by these kinds of plants. So make sure your tomatoes are ripe before you eat them. So we'll not go back to Fallout New Vegas for this because I've already talked about the recipe, but the fresh potatoes, they give you 1 hit point per second for 7 seconds, -15 starvation and -10 dehydration if you're in survival mode. And they are an ingredient in Cook's Fiend Stew that we discussed earlier. In Fallout 4, the potatoes are a very common crop, so you're really not far from Sanctuary here. You come down to Abernathy Farm and they obviously have a nice big field of them. They're very common, so they grow on vines and they do look like tomatoes but are brown on the inside, and apparently they grow well and they do satisfy hunger, but they taste disgusting. So they provide 0.5 food for your settlements, and they are included in some of the recipes we've already talked about earlier: the squirrel stew, the vegetable soup, the vegetable starch, and the yalgoi roast. But there are a couple of other recipes that you can craft. One of them I don't have, which is the Deathclaw Wellingham. So last week we talked about the Devil's Dew and the quest with the pristine Deathclaw egg. So if you decide to take the pristine Deathclaw egg to Diamond City to Wellingham instead of returning it to the Deathclaws, then you will be given this recipe by Wellingham. So you need a Deathclaw egg, a dirty water and a tato, and it appears to be a souffle, which is interesting. Not something that would be that easy to make, I think. Souffles, when you have a fully functional kitchen, aren't easy to make. But there you have it. And unsurprisingly, if you build the food processor and you want to make Instamash or potato crisps, you need potatoes because they are potatoes, kind of. They're kind of what you've got as a potato, essentially. And then the final one is one that I don't have on me. Right, so Nuka Mixer Station. So, yeah, I don't actually have the recipe here, but you need one of these anyway. So you can find this recipe. It's behind the Jungle Journey Theatre and the Safari Adventure part of the Nuka World Park. It's called Nuka Hearty. So you need a carrot flour, a Nuka Cola Dark, a Nuka Cola and a tato. And you get 150 hit points, 50 action points, and plus 25 carry weight for 8 minutes. So actually, potentially quite a useful one. If you can get the recipe. I say, when you build the mixer station, it does come with a handful of recipes, but you do need to... is that cat just lying on a pile of rubble? Wow. Cats will literally sleep anywhere. But... yeah, so you can find quite a few of the Nuka-Cola recipes and things. There's just so much to the crafting in this game. It's great. But, the Nuka Hearty is potentially quite an interesting one. It doesn't sound all that appetising, but you know what? That is what it is. You have to make do with what you can get in this wasteland economy. So that's a rundown of the kind of vegetables that you can find in Fallout and all the myriad of things that you can make with them. You know, definitely quite a useful thing because, you know, everybody needs food to survive, but you know, there's some fun things that you can make with them. So hopefully you found that interesting, and as always I do love to hear your thoughts. Do you have any kind of recipes that you like to use that you found quite useful in your adventures? Let me know in the comments, and we'll be back next week with some more plants, so I will see you then.